There has certainly been a lot of discussion about the Cleveland Browns draft, who they drafted, when they drafted them. But one of the more talked about picks, I'd say up until late Saturday afternoon, was quarterback Dillon Gabriel. And why not find the leader of the Church of Dillon Gabriel, Mr. CBS Sports' Mike Renner, and discuss it with him. We'll do that now. Browns 3D starts. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR, and it is brought to you by State Sharpening, Mower Sales and Service. Your host, Jeff Lloyd. Again, continued appreciation for everybody. It's been a hell of a draft cycle. We told you it was going to be. There's going to be highs and lows, the Miles drama, the quarterback talk, and a quarterback room that in the beginning we all said you probably were not going to be too sure of when it was all said and done. And we sit right here, and I'm sure everybody is not too sure of this room when it was all said and done. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. We will get to the well-traveled lefty in a minute. But Mike, obviously, one half of the Pushing the Pile podcast, of course, with Kyle Long. The the trade itself that got this whole ball rolling and changed the entire direction of the way the Browns draft went. We were live streaming, and with the sources that we kind of had, we were getting that it was picking up momentum as we started about 7 o'clock, and then it really started to pick up even more momentum. And then so right around 8 o'clock, it was like, look, this probably looks like this is going to happen. I kind of described it, and I'm sure some of you probably don't remember, but it was almost like kind of watching the OJ thing years and years ago, because it was just like it was nothing we all saw coming. We spent months dragged out, punches thrown, Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter. In the end, nobody won, nobody lost, but the Browns made this move, obviously, and of course, the key to it all was getting and securing, which for Cleveland is the second first round pick in 2026.
Yeah, I loved it, honestly. I was saying all draft cycle that, to me, Travis Hunter didn't make that much sense for the Browns. Not that like he's not an awesome talent, but he was a great wide receiver for them because he wasn't playing corner for them, going to a place without a quarterback, and wasn't really, when you don't have a quarterback, you can have as many wide receivers as you want. And yeah, it helps, but like it's hard to really still get high-end caliber passing offense when you just don't have a guy. So I thought, yeah, he's an awesome talent, whatever. But I think the way they did it, you now give yourself so many more shots at, the quote unquote guy, which is what they did in that draft. But then also next year, if these guys don't work out. And it's not as if Mason Graham, who you traded back for, is, you lost out on a chance at an elite player altogether. Mason Graham can be an elite player at a position you also need that makes a big impact, especially when you have a guy like Myles Garrett. And especially when, when you made the playoffs a couple of years ago, it was on the backs of an elite defense. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that, we're talking about a franchise-defining draft for the Cleveland Browns, at least draft decision, because they added, an entire backfield from the trade, Mason Graham, and then it could be a quarterback as well. We'll see what ends up happening there. But I love the process, and I think you make more decisions like that, you keep having a good football team.
Well, that was the thing, because I was team Abdul Carter, and part of it is okay, we're bringing in Hunter, but I already committed to Judy. We had David Njoku. It felt like I was building the room backwards. I used the example of the Bengals, drafted Burrow, came back a round later, got Higgins, came back a year later, got Chase, because not necessarily every quarterback necessarily fits every wide receiver. So now we have a hard enough time finding the guy as it is. But now we need to find the guy that is going to perfectly work with Hunter, is going to perfectly work with Jerry Jeudy. The Browns, it seems that all intents and purposes are to continue the relationship with David Njoku. So it seemed like you had the room built, but, you still couldn't find the guy, but now you needed the specific guy in addition, which certainly in my mind. But they went defense 1. They went defense at 2 at 33. Because it also let me just get Carter, because he's going to do a lot more for the defense than Hunter's going to do when we still don't have a quarterback. But they went defense twice right out of the gate. And look, they get flat out bullied. 2,200 yards on the ground, over 20 touchdowns, 4.5 yards per carry. Yes, there were some guys who ended up missing time, throughout the season, whether it was Hall, they played Juwan Briggs a little too late. Their redoing of the 2023 defensive tackle room as far as the vets didn't necessarily hit the way it did in 23. So there were moves that were absolutely needed. And I think people just assumed, well, if the offense is better, the defense was better. Well, that's not always going to necessarily be the case.
Yeah, I was Team Carter too, because I think two elite edge rushers can give you a high floor defense. And it's like you would have had 5 years of those guys together, given Miles' contract extension. But I think even besides that, I would have rather done this than even that. And that might just be how I feel about Mason Graham. Mason Graham had some detractors, but I thought, I thought Carter Hunter was a tier. I thought Graham was a tier, and then I thought everyone else was a tier in this draft class. Like that's how I saw how good those top three were at the top of this class.
It was a fun group, and I agree with the consensus that where it got to the I don't know if there's much of a difference between like 7 and 40, honestly. And I think that was probably wide receiver probably played it well into that thought process. The cornerback class, it was good. It wasn't necessarily there. They felt like there was a big drop off between guys who had the athleticism and the production of a Carter. So it was a good class. It just wasn't necessarily a top heavy class that just said, oh, this top 10 is, starstruck. And that was even because as we were doing the stream, well, maybe they should drop to 10 now. And everybody, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's get out of here at least with something that we could say, hey, it was elite, it was a blue chip. And Mason Graham certainly, looks like he's going to be and I think the other thing with Graham and the other selections they made certainly early on, it was, good player, but really good kid. And there's a stink that they're trying to get off of this franchise right now, a 3-year stink. And bringing some of these guys in are hopefully the recipe to, basically, cologne the Cleveland Browns.
I like that terminology. Yeah, I mean, they needed resetting, right? You're just, even just from a cap perspective, you're too expensive. And when that's the case, one star player does not fix all that ails the Browns. They need just a roster full of cheap talent. And with this, they got, not a full roster, but they got, let's say, a third of the roster, right? Full of cheap talent here.
Very, very much needed. All right, we're going to continue, and we will start getting to more of the reasons we brought Mike Renner on with us here today. But would be remiss without mentioning one more time. It's been a great relationship over the last few months with the good folks at State Sharpening Mower Sales and Service. They are located in Broadview Heights. Whether it's Toro tractors or whether it's Cub Cadet, they've got you covered, guys. Look out the window, man. It's getting nice. It's raining. Guess what? Grass is growing. It's time to start addressing it. If you need anything, you go check out the fine folks over at State Sharpening. They are veteran owned. The Kane family are lifetime Clevelanders. They are lifetime Browns fans and proud supporters of all of us here at the OBR. Again, if you are local to Cleveland, State Sharpening Mower Sales and Service in Broadview Heights is your hometown team for all your lawn equipment needs. Anything you need, their info can be found at statesharp.com, STATESHARP.com. Now, there's a couple of schools of thought here. I think once the trade went down and the Browns knew they had 2 first rounders for 2026, I honestly think, and it takes a lot to get a room to shake up a draft, philosophy, plan, certainly a board and certainly a positional board. But I think that really changed the philosophy for them with the quarterbacks. Because a lot of people, it was, hey, 33 is going to go up. So you're going to lose 33. You're going to lose maybe another decent pick because you're going to go up. You're going to get one of these guys. They had met with Dart. They had met with everybody, obviously. Dart gets traded. Obviously, the Giants trade up. They get Jackson Dart. Browns go in night 2, sitting there with 33 and 36. Whatever quarterback they want, they can take. And I think that's when they were basically allowed to go into their true feelings. A lot of us thought, and maybe we were wrong. Maybe it was just so much Tommy Reese, Jalen Milroe, that it was hard to not focus on that. You just really thought that maybe that was a connection. Certainly there was Shedor's name, but those 2 picks go by. Another pick goes by later on day 2. Milroe goes 92. Browns are on the clock 94. Do they pull on Shedeur? And as we were getting the info, everybody was like, oh, we got, it's a quarterback. So everybody, oh, Shedeur. No, not that quarterback. And Dillon Gabriel, well, Oregon, Oklahoma, Central Florida, parts of Hawaii, the well-traveled Dillon Gabriel.
Well, I love Dillon Gabriel. I had him as QB3. When he come off the board, QB4 in the class, I think is ultimately where he came off. And the guy's just played a ton of football. I just think he has a really high floor at the position that's, that's competent. He was never overwhelmed. He never went into a shell. Like, the guy's played enough and seen enough, whether it was, the most prolific passer in Hawaii football history, the most experienced college quarterback of all time. There's a reason why the first game against Ohio State that Oregon put the boots to him. Like, that was one of the best quarterback games I saw all season. That was some of the best quarterback tape you'll see in this draft class. Like, he has an NFL arm. It's stronger than Shedeur's, in my opinion. And he has NFL mobility. Like, his ability to escape outside the pocket and find lanes and then, make plays as a runner, I think got underrated throughout the process because it's not like his first move, but it's an option in his bag that's going to translate to the NFL. So there is a lot to like about his game. It didn't necessarily surprise me. Now, I think if you went Shedeur 2 and Dillon Gabriel in the 5th round, no one bats an eye. But I think, honestly, the way they did it is better if you had a higher grade on Shedeur. Like, if you want Shedeur to be the guy, this is going to get you a more motivated Shedeur, right? Like, he's going to be pissed off wanting to prove people wrong. If you just draft him at number 2, he would have come in like he owned the place, like he did at Colorado, I think. So I think this is your best case scenario. Now, there are obviously potential for this backfiring. It is unprecedented in NFL history, at least modern NFL history, my recollection. I don't remember a team doing a 3rd and a 5th the way they did like this when they needed a quarterback. But I don't think it's untenable in that locker room. And honestly, like, in this class, that's where you should have been drafting them, not number 2 overall.
And this is also, I think, a thing for the two of them, though. Look, Dillon Gabriel, the story's been the same everywhere he went. He was well liked. He was well respected. It was just that he was maybe jumping in competition with each time he kind of moved on. Everywhere he went, everybody kind of fell in love with him, gravitate to him, that type of personality. And, look, all of us were athletes. And if my dad was the coach, I probably would have handled myself appropriately as my dad was the coach. You know what I'm saying? I can't really get in trouble for much. Probably not going to get benched, guys. Sorry. My old man's running the whole entire thing here. Is definitely not the case for Dillon Gabriel. And of course, a lot of this, and we'll get to Shedeur in a minute. For Shedeur, though, it is going to be getting out of basically the umbrella of the Sanders family. But for Gabriel and what he did, whether it was, both stops, Oklahoma, I still remember the big win over Texas. And you just basically, it was just like, here is this guy now. And, this Hawaii kid, normally all the Texas quarterbacks, all the Oklahoma quarterbacks are usually Texas kids. And here he was, basically, the king of Norman. But there's times, and putting up highlights or whatever. Oh, it's great. He got 6 seconds to throw. Yeah, well, every other quarterback is going to run. Every other quarterback is not going to wait for the things to develop and say, "Hey, well, I have the 6 seconds." Somebody's going to get open, and it's a little bit of it's not certainly a Tim Tebow lefty motion, but it is a quick and it is dart and it is accurate. And I think that is probably the biggest misconception people have is that just when they see him, they see the listed size, they think the ball's just not traveling as fast as some of his other the guys he was competing with in this quarterback class, and it's just simply not true.
Oh, 100%. Just go watch his throws against air at the combine. They obviously do the air it out sort of section where you're doing goes, you're doing like deep corners. He's putting it 65 through the air, no problem, on like a straight drop, normal, no wind up, no like crow hop. He's just putting it from the pocket. If you guys can do that, that's what Jaden Daniels kind of topped out at on his Hail Mary. You can do 65. You can play in the NFL all day. That's capable, more than capable NFL arm strength. It's not putting you. I'm not putting him like top 10 in the NFL, right? There's guys with, elite arm talent, guys that are a lot better, but it's as strong, if not stronger, than Joe Burrow's. It's more than capable. Guys like Dak Prescott, who have been borderline MVPs, Matt Ryan. Like, I'd put it in that sort of conversation. His arm strength. So it's not a bad arm whatsoever.
And I guess the final thing I'm going to go with here with Gabriel, and and we're nuts, because we all cover this stuff, and we're on as late as we are. And the next thing you know, there it is, 2 a.m. and I'm still thumbing through social media because now I'm just wired and I can't go to bed. And like my final line is look, even if Dillon Gabriel doesn't necessarily ever become QB1, becomes QB2, plays a little bit here and there, goes through 4 years of his contract. Nobody's going to give a hill of beans at the end of the day that he was the 94th selection in the 2025 NFL draft. I don't think anybody's going to care about that. And I think what they're going to care about is again, what we were prefacing earlier, getting good kids, getting just generally good people into that building. And, it could make for a weird dynamic, of course, because with pick 144, you select Shador Sanders. So you could essentially, for 4 years, have Dillon Gabriel saying, yeah, bro, here's your laptop. By the way, I make more money than you. I mean, which would just make for some fun sideline stuff. I do want to get to the running backs. We'll get to that last. But so we're sitting here and it's like, all right, well, we got 166 and 192. And everybody gets to that point on day 3 where it's like, well, I don't know if there's much here left anyway. You know what? You want to trade up here and maybe call it a day? I don't think, anybody here is necessary. And there it was, the trade up 192, 166. You jump in front of Philly. I don't think Philly was doing it anyway necessarily. 144. They go ahead finally. They select Shador Sanders. Browns fans, you got to love them because the same people, that were getting angry that they took him at all were the same people that were telling you in the beginning of February that he needed to be a pick at 2. And it's like, well, you got him 142 picks later, guys. So I don't understand what the problem. And my first thing is, even if I had my concerns, and I talked with a bunch of people after he was drafted, and like, look, most of your concerns are only going to be proven by drafting him. He's leaving Colorado. He's not playing for his dad anymore. He's got to stand up on his own 2 feet. So what everybody tried to use as a negative on him, the only way you're going to know is if he came into your building. He's on his own now, and it's certainly it's going to be a change. Normally the college quarterback doesn't spend as much time home at dad/coach's house. He's usually in the sorority houses, this, that, and the other thing. But the pick was made, and thoughts just on Shedeur himself, and then B, is Cleveland a correct fit for him? Can they each adapt to each other to make it work?
I think they can. I do think that, the guy, he's talented. He's not physically impressive. I think that's the best way to put it. It's like there are things to his game that are NFL ready, that are very capable, that like you can see him becoming a high-end starter. Like his toughness, his creativity. Like there are some things on tape where like, damn, that's like easy to fall in love with. But then you watch his arm strength, and it is like he'll probably be bottom 10 or so in the NFL. And that's maybe giving him a little too much credit. Somewhere in the bottom 6
less than mid.
Yeah. In terms of arm strength, he is very skinny for the position. I mean, he will be one of the lightest quarterbacks in the NFL. He's not a great athlete, even if he wants to use his athleticism a lot. He could have similar issues to like Baker early on in his career before he kind of figured out that like, hey, I'm not the athlete that I was in high school. Like these guys are fast too. He always wanted to create a little bit more, and he didn't have that. I could see Shedeur falling into some of those same traps. So he's a developmental guy. He's played a lot of football, but it still needs big time development. And that's why I think a lot of people are seeing, doesn't have elite tools, still a developmental guy. More often than not, that's a day 2 quarterback. Just that just is, right? There just wasn't, outside of Cam Ward, I didn't see a single other day 1 quarterback. There's just not ever in every class. So I think a lot of people were trying to make him that for whatever reason, but I just never saw it. So to get that guy though in the 5th, you have to be very excited, because usually developmental quarterbacks, usually to get a guy who's played the way he has, it is usually either a back end of the 1st or a mid day 2. But now you got 2 with almost no investment whatsoever. And just the nature of the quarterback position is that it's such outsized returns if you hit. I mean, even a Brock Purdy, how valuable that is, who's, probably a below average. He's probably like quarterback 16 to 18 in the NFL. You get a massive return on that. It's so much easier to build the roster around him because you're not paying him, Deshaun Watson money. So now you have 2 guys, 2 chances of just getting NFL average play. I think it's possible one of them does. I think it's very possible, but I wouldn't have used a first rounder to do it. So I think the Cleveland Browns, their decision-making and kind of how they went about the business, was great business in my opinion.
seeing as you were ready probably to commit 33, 36 to a Jalen Milroe or one of these
Yeah.
things, because even me, it was like, well, just take the quarterback now. You got the extra picks. My biggest fear was losing picks to have to trade up. But now, and you can't say extra because of all you lost with Deshaun Watson, but it was, well, I now have more than I had. So I was like, all
Mhm.
right, well, and obviously the Browns at the end of the day told us how they truly felt about this class, liked them, didn't love him, essentially. And normally when we talk about a quarterback that went at pick 44, and this is great for us who do Browns content, because normally your fifth round pick is not going to flood people to come read or to come watch for months upon months, but the name Shador Sanders will certainly do that, let alone a quarterback taken at 144. You're saying, well, maybe he makes the team. Maybe he's the practice squad guy. But between 94 Dillon Gabriel and 144 Shador Sanders, I think the real conversation is which one of the two leads the Browns in starts in 2025. Because unless what if it's Flacco or Pickett, and one of them is probably not going to be here, unless they go out and go 5-1, it's going to be all right. Well, let's get the kids on the field.
Yeah, honestly, I think the more NFL ready one is Gabriel, just for what I mentioned. Like, he's played way more football, and
Sure.
I think the Oregon offense was a little more pro style. Even, it does a lot of gimmicky stuff, a lot of screens, but the actual passing concepts, I think, prepared him more for the NFL. So I think he's the more NFL ready of the two. I do think if I'm looking at that quarterback room, who's the odd man out, I would guess Kenny Pickett. Unfortunately, you've never seen that next step from him at this point in time. And so if you're the Browns and you're just like, why would I keep Kenny Pickett on the roster if I have a chance to develop two guys who are quite a bit younger, with similar promise coming out? I think they'd go that route before they kept Kenny Pickett on that roster.
Yeah, and obviously the other thing is where it's tough for Pickett versus Flacco is we've already we've kind of danced this dance, and we know Joe ain't going to come in and give you 17 games, but we've already seen Joe give you a wild 6-week ride, and that could possibly happen, and talent could be a little better overall on the offensive side of the ball, but I absolutely love what they did. First off, I thought analytically it was going to be two running backs on day three because A, that's normally where you get running backs. B, it was a tremendously large class where you easily could have gotten two running backs on day three. We were actually being told before it was Trevion Henderson. So when it first came, we were like, well, all right, well, we got that. We were told that wrong. It turned into Quinshon Judkins. I like to call him a bumper car running back. Sometimes he looks for contact that's not necessarily there or needs
Mm-hmm.
to be had, but some guys it just gets them going. Um, and I wasn't, the speed tested out. I wasn't sure because sometimes, he does get caught behind, but he's such a physical runner. The athleticism, the jumps were all impressive. But I mean, you look at the kid's body of work for, 2 years down in the South, then you come up to Ohio State. I mean, the yards per carry, the yardage total, the touchdown total, this guy rang the bell each and every week through 3 years.
And he's physically impressive. I mean, one of, after probably Genty and Amarian Hampton, probably the best physical specimen in this draft class, just in terms of size, explosiveness, speed, contact balance. Like, he is, that's how you go where he went, right? I do think that even if he wasn't the lead dog for Ohio State, it's like I wouldn't be too worried. Trevion Henderson's pretty elite too. They had a different backfield. I wouldn't worry too much about that. I love his tape. Like, truly, this running back class had so many guys, but he did stand out in a way in terms of NFL translatability.
Another question for me. And now, when they opened up day three, I was a huge Dylan Sampson guy. He seemed like the one running back in the class that maybe wasn't getting as much talk as maybe deserved. And there were a lot of guys. It was just, it certainly was a tough class to be in. And there's always those guys who are like, man, look, that's fine. Like, I don't want a microphone in front of me every single day. I don't want this. But some guys obviously, lose that opportunity. But they came back and they weren't sure they were going to go two running backs. I think they just had several graded high, and maybe due to the depth of the class, maybe that's why they didn't necessarily go as high. You needed that run to start, the 3 and 5 picks. But they go with Sampson, and Sampson again, impressive, 22 touchdowns. And this is what I really like what the Browns did. A lot of people talked about the production. Well, between Fannin, between Judkins, between Dylan Sampsons, that's 49 touchdowns they added. 49 touchdowns these guys scored this past fall. This team desperately needs points. But you go back and, Browns fans, we're going to still wait this out with Nick Chubb. But if it is post Nick Chubb for the Cleveland Browns, you really, really put together a nice room and you've got these guys under control for 4 years together.
And after this draft, I'm pretty sure you are moving out from Nick Chubb. Like I don't see the room in there. But I think if you're going to go complimentary, you're going to build a committee. They did about as good as you could in this draft, right? I think, Judkins trends more towards short yardage, more better on those type of concepts, whereas Sampson out in space is just so electric that, he's your guy you're throwing screens to. He's that sort of back, your more space player to your between the tackles player and Quinshon Judkins. I think they're very complementary and both can, put a big role in this offense.
Now, it wouldn't be fair, obviously, not have you here and get a little words here on the rest of the AFC North. Do I think the Browns are, competing, contending? No, I don't think they are. Do I think even if it is a team that isn't going to be contention, it's going to be a team to enjoy the product a little bit more here in 2025? I agree there. But some thoughts here, certainly, because I think Baltimore, and this is the one I think everybody saw it to come about 3 picks away, was the whole Mike Green situation. And then it was, everybody kind of like just smacked your cup out of the way. You're like, you know what? That's where he's going to go. And, the Ravens may have just, said, we don't care, double-digit sacks.
Yeah, that one, it almost feels unfair where it's like, yeah, we know why he fell, but like,
pass, but like,
how'd you get him?
Like, why do you get the pass, especially with what's going on there anyway?
Yeah, so I mean, everyone had the same take on Mike Green. He is much better than the 59th best player. I had him 10th ranked player. So Ravens, I mean, just an insane haul with what they got. I think they still have a chokehold on that division. I don't think anyone else over the course of the offseason made strides enough that I wouldn't put the Ravens at the top. Now, I do think the Steelers had at least a solid draft. I supported their decision not to go quarterback. Everyone's like, they got to go quarterback. I didn't agree with that whatsoever. If you got Rodgers, this wasn't the year necessarily for developmental guys. This was more a year for like those day 2 guys. I think are actually more, whether it was Shuck, whether it was Dillon Gabriel, they're more like you can play them probably right away. Like they played enough, they're old enough. You can probably play them right away. It's just how good can they actually get was more this class. So if you're going developmental guy, if you're looking quarterback of the future, just wait on until next year. So I like what they did, even if, I don't think they made massive strides. It's really going to depend on how good Aaron Rodgers is. And obviously with his injury history and his age, I'm not willing to bet on Aaron Rodgers looking like Aaron Rodgers. I think the Bengals truly had the worst draft of any team, I think, in the NFL, unfortunately. And I say that as someone who lived in Cincinnati for 8 years and they're kind of the team I hope wins in the AFC if I did have one. And I just thought they completely missed the mark on what they needed to do in this draft. We'll see though, but I think they needed guys that could play a role right now. And I don't think any of the guys they drafted can help them year one. They are the same team they were last year. They just have to pray that, either the guys on the rookie deal or that their defensive coordinator change is a big enough turnover to get them back into the playoffs.
See, now this makes it difficult for me, Mike. The town where I am from in New Jersey, the big adopted brother here in New Jersey, we all wanted to be our older brother, was, in fact, Al Golden. We all went to the Catholic high school to play football due to Al Golden. So Al is as good of a guy as he can be, and definitely had me snickering at times because it was like, well, what are you really doing for him here, guys? And I don't know if Trey Hendrickson is part of that defense. I think it tremendously, obviously, helps. The Shamar Stewart, it was just, well, this is fantastic. And then, the production really just left you gasping for air because honestly, if they had just taken Mike Green and said, what do you expect us to do? We might lose Trey Hendrickson. B, if we have Mike Green, it would have been the same reason that all of us were barking that Abdul Carter and Myles Garrett was the reason you should have went Carter at 2.
Yeah, the Mike Green though, not their type, right? They have a type. Duke Tobin has been there for 20 something years now, and I don't think he's ever drafted a 6'2", 250-pound edge, right? He likes 6'4" plus. He likes 260 plus. That's just their type. And for every, Carlos Dunlap, Justin Smith that ends up working out, you get a Miles Murphy that doesn't necessarily. So, yeah, unfortunately for the Bengals, I think they got another Miles Murphy, and he might just be sitting here a few years from now being like, when's the production going to come?
And yeah, look, because if you don't have it, that is the toughest thing to actually, predict, because usually there is a reason it did not happen up until that point. He is Mike Renner, CBS Sports, half of the Pushing the Pile podcast with Kyle Long. If you guys do not have it in the rotation, first off, have yourself checked, see a doctor. It's a great show because you get Mike and you get Kyle, Kyle just doesn't care. Whatever Kyle Long has on his mind is what Kyle Long is going to say.
Correct.
And it's because, and that's what I love about it most, Mike, is because you see you nodding along, and then there's times like, I don't know where this is going. I don't know what he's going to say next. And Kyle just absolutely tells it like it is. So I want to thank you here. Of course, Mike was one of, the leaders of the band, so to speak, on Dillon Gabriel. So it made the most sense to get him here with us today. Again, the OBR support, you guys were tremendous over the last 4 months. You guys were tremendous over the weekend. You guys were tremendous when Casey Kinnaman actually ate the Spam. I cannot believe he ate the entire plate of it. And that is what led to him not being around for day 3, because apparently it was bad Spam. And I don't know how there's good Spam or bad Spam. If it comes in a can and they send it to war with soldiers, I don't know how it actually expires. But that happened to our guy, unfortunately. So you guys had a blast. We certainly had a blast. This has been Browns 3D on the OBR, brought to you by State Sharpening Mower Sales and Service. Again, subscribe to the OBR on YouTube, subscribe over on Twitch. We appreciate everybody for all the support. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.